Hold on. All right. Welcome to the Lean and Mean Jamstack. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are. Today we'll be talking about Jamstack and starting from the basics to what you should be aware of, how it would work for you. We're live streaming right now, so you could catch our streams on the LinkedIn Live on our event page. The URLs are at the bottom of the screen, and Facebook Live and YouTube Live, and they're also posted pretty much everywhere on social. So who are we? So you say Konabos. It's a Greek mythological character, the fourth horse of Ares. And we do quite a bit of work in the general DXP space, and we're here today trying to present a little bit on Jamstack. My name is Akshay Sura. I've been in this IT industry for over 20 years, concentrating on CMSs and web stack. Dennis or Cam, you want to go next?
Oh, yeah, I'm Dennis Augustine, and I'm one of the three partners over at Konabos. I'm a strategist and CX architect by disposition and trade.
And my name is Kamruz Jaman, another partner at Konabos. Like Akshay, I've been in this industry for over 20 years and concentrating in the CMS space for just over 12 years now.
All right, with us today, we have Mark Demeny. Mark, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So Mark Demeny, and I'm Director of Content Management Strategy at Contentful. And I've been in CMS for a very long time, about, I think, 16 years, and in the overall industry for about 20 years. So just a few more years on the rest of the young kids here.
And then we also have Andre. Andre, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Andre. I work as a developer evangelist at Kentico Content, which is a headless CMS. I used to work in a customer facing roles for quite some time. Then I switched to developer evangelism to be able to educate as many people as I can. So my passion lies really in development in .NET, in Jamstack. When there is a code, I'm there.
Nice. All right, so let's get started.
So this is why we're here. What is this Jamstack business that everybody's been making all this noise about? Jamstack's been gaining a lot of popularity, particularly in the last 4 years. It's a bit of a paradigm shift, I think, for a lot of people compared to how they have traditionally been building their CMS-based websites, particularly. The concept itself isn't something new. I think it's something that's been around for almost a couple of decades, but it's gained a lot of popularity, particularly with a lot of these headless SaaS-based CMSs gaining more traction, gaining more prevalence, and the availability and options being there for customers. Jamstack itself, if you break it down to the very essence, it is very, very simple. It stands for JavaScript, APIs, and Markup, which is the foundation of what the web is built on, right? Some HTML pages, you have some JavaScript to create some interactivity, and then you have some APIs that you can fetch and pass data to. The architecture itself is, again, very simple when you break it down to its raw essence. You can use a headless CMS or some other content source to statically generate some HTML. You have some JavaScript, which will add this functionality in order to call some APIs, which will in turn add some interactive and dynamic content back into your HTML pages. So it gives you the best of both worlds, where you have static generated content, which is very, very fast to serve to your website visitors. You have the JavaScript for the interactivities, and you have the API for the richness, for the data, and all of that other information that you would require. The APIs can be hosted internally, or you can make use of more modern web architectures, serverless architectures, such as AWS Lambda functions, Azure functions, or Netlify functions, and that in turn can reach into a number of different sources, including internal data sources if need be. And this is just an overview of that Jamstack, right? So we can see how that's jam in that stack fits together over those three pieces. Again, pretty at the raw essence, it really is bringing the web back to its basics. So why should we be looking at Jamstack? Why is there such a fuss over this? With a lot of these traditional CMSs and tools that we have been using to build websites, there has introduced a lot of complexity, and along with that, a lot of costs and maintenance issues. It's becoming more and more difficult to move quickly, to move fast, to move with the times. And if 2020 has proved anything, it's that we need to be ready, and we need to be extremely agile and extremely quick in how we deliver experiences to our customers to meet their needs and their ever-changing needs. Jamstack simplifies this. It allows us to reduce costs heavily by breaking our websites down to just static content, which is very, very cheap to host. It's very, very simple to host as well. It's just a file system somewhere in the web, in the cloud. It makes it extremely scalable as a result. We can make use of content delivery networks to have this content served across the globe and not suffering from any experience, any slowness, and customers getting that responsive responses to their website, to the pages that they're trying to load. Performance, as a result, of course, it's just static HTML. You can serve this all day long, and as a result, there are very little security issues in this. You can't really hack an HTML page. You're not exposing your backend services. You're not exposing your headless, your CMS or your content sources. And the developer experience is greatly enhanced. It's very, very simple for developers to get set up. They can work on any kind of machinery that they want, whether that's a Windows machine, a MacBook, or a Linux. It's very, very quick to set up. There's no proprietary software that they need, and they're not using any proprietary software stacks. Everything that we use to build Jamstack-based websites are open source. A lot of sites are built using tooling like React or Angular, as well as other frameworks like Next and Nuxt and Gatsby, which you'll see. These are all open source tools. They can be used not just in your Jamstack project, but they can be used across your organization. And the learning and the documentation available for this is huge. It's a big open source community, and it's as a result, it makes learning this system much easier. Now, what is my Jamstack? What is the parts of my stack that we need to use? The answer to this, of course, is it depends. One size doesn't fit all. It's a very, very modular system, so you can pick the best of breed from every piece of the technology stack that your organization needs. So whether that's the headless CMS itself, or an analytics piece, or a headless commerce piece, or a forms piece, it really does depend on what fits the needs of your organization. We'll present to you some options, but equally, if you have a good partner, a good technology partner, they will help you through this journey. It probably sounds a little bit scary than it is, but once you start to look at the different systems, and how that matches your organization's needs, you will see the power of being able to select those pieces yourself and when you need them. You don't need to start with everything. You can build up this technology stack over time, and as your requirements change.
Yeah, thank you, Cam. And Cam left off a little bit saying how one size does not fit all when it comes to these systems. And it's interesting that this is a little bit of a shift in the direction that things were going. We started off with web content management systems, and in 2020, Gartner replaced the web content management report with one for digital experience systems. And what they defined a digital experience system is as a platform that integrated a set of core technologies and supports the composition, management, delivery, and optimization of digital experiences. That's a mouthful. And obviously that's was in recognition to some changes that were happening in the marketplace. First of all, we moved away from just being web-based systems to really wanting to talk about omnichannel delivery. We wanted to add capabilities like marketing automation and so forth. So really what then needed to happen was we were responding to certain drivers that were in the marketplace, drivers like the omnichannel capabilities, drivers like marketing automation, personalization, analytics, and more of that was getting added on top of web content management. So DXPs became the phrase that we were using to describe that. So what we was promised really in that case was these suites that would do quite a bit. The suites were to really to cover a lot of different technologies, to really cover a lot of different capabilities. And organizations were typically acquiring other organizations and technologies to integrate on top of that. So we got a lot of cobbling together of a lot of technology at times. The promise was to have something that was less disjointed. The promise really was to have something that was seamlessly integrated, and then to really be able to have a one-stop shop for your DXP. So that kind of went contrary to what Cam just said about this one-size-fits-all kind of approach to the DXP platforms. So what criticisms might we have about that, or really the marketplace had about that, that these were, instead of being seamlessly integrated, some of them ended up to be a bit of Frankenstein monsters to some degree. There was a lot of bloat happening. The complexity of the systems ballooned. And of course, the expense that was incurred just on the resource side and the licensing side also became a bit of a problem in some cases. It's a little bit hard for some companies to really swallow. So there became a shift then in the conversation folks were having around DXPs. So I would describe some of the DXPs that we had currently and previously as what we call suite DXPs, or some would want to call them monoliths. We started moving away from suite DSPs to a more modular approach. That's a shift in architecture. And that architectural shift was due in a large part to the rise of these API first sort of approaches towards doing your architecture. So we ended up then making a move, having the benefits then being really things about loose coupling. So we don't really have to have everything in one place. We can have the different pieces interact with each other, which of course aligned a lot better with some of the other principles we would follow in architecture. So loose coupling, some solid principles in terms of architecture. It also aligned a lot better with the moves we're seeing right now with microservices. And so a lot of organizations are adopting a microservice sort of approach, serverless architectures and so forth. And as a result of breaking up these monolithic systems, we were able to move content a little bit closer to the so actually rather centralize that content and distribute it in an omni-channel kind of way, and to have a reliance on more of be a little bit less bound to the web delivery channel. That's why we got rid of that W in the WCMS, now talking about omni-channel DXPs. A lot of these solutions being SaaS-based, of course, which then means that you're going to have a lot less infrastructure cost and have more freedom to choose the best of breed in each of the categories in which you really want to choose your DXP components. Not everybody needs everything that's in one of these larger solutions. So having a Jamstack approach or a modular DXP approach then gives you the capability to choose your own path, really to build your own DXP. There's a resource one I want to alert you to, buildyourown.dxp.com. It talks about a lot of different modules that are going to be available to you, things like the content management system, of course, and we're happy to have our partners from Contentful and Content to tell you about a couple of those. Of course, there's tools like Content Hub as well that we work with. Digital asset management falls into that category. Your content, or sorry, rather your customer relationship management being an important piece of your modular DXP. Customer data platform, where you aggregate all of your distant customer data, do analysis of that. And of course, when we're talking about analysis, there are a wealth of tools, best of breed tools, with regards to doing things like AI, business intelligence, and e-commerce. Akshay is going to take a little bit of time and really start to lead you through some of those options for things like e-commerce, customer experience management, and really doing things like measuring conversion rates and whatnot. So have a look at to build your own DXP, and I'm going to hand over to Akshay as he kind of goes through a lot of your options that you have in each of these areas.
All right, thank you, Dennis. So we talked a lot about Jamstack. We also pushed out quite a bit of content in terms of videos as well as blog posts, and this seems to be like the hottest new thing. But as Cameron's mentioned, this isn't a new concept. It's an older concept, but a lot has changed in the last couple of decades in terms of web. Things have gotten better. APIs have gotten smarter. It's just in general a better choice. There's quite a bit of headless CMSs out there. It truly depends on what your approach is, what you feel most comfortable with, but these are some of the prominent ones we could mention. And of course, we have Mark from Contentful and Andre from Content who will speak a little bit about what their approach is to some of these. But any of these, you could take a look. Most of them provide free options for you to test them out. All of them are API based, and since it's headless, and all of them are standardized APIs. Most of them have GraphQL endpoints, so it's truly easy for you to just build your website, whether it's statically generated, whether you have server-side running. Either way, you could use any technology, including .NET, in order to build your website by consuming these CMSs. Again, we talked about static generation. There's not a lot of .NET-based tools for static generation. There is static. I think Andre had a recent webinar on this as well. It's pretty decent. I've actually played around with most of these. We use Next.js just for preference reasons, but there's quite a bit of tools out there for you to pick what you would like. Infrastructure-wise, honestly, you pick it, you can host it. So if you wanted to do in-house on-prem, you wanted to do Azure VMs, you want to do app services, you could use anything you need in order to build and host these websites. And again, as Camrose mentioned, these are essentially, at the end of the day, if you choose the static site generation route, just HTML, CSS, and JS files sitting somewhere. And truly, with nowadays the things you have in play, you could host these sites for zero for all you care, or very minimum monthly, in order to get such a great performance out of them. They're cached all over the world, super fast, sub-second website. So it's pretty easy. So world's your oyster. You could pretty much host it anywhere you like. Again, ton of search options. Algolia, Elastic are pretty popular. You could even do Google custom search if that's the way you want to go. Truly, again, multiple choices in the Jamstack space. You just have to figure out what works best for your organization based on the resources you have. And that's one of the things we went through, is that you don't have to be locked into a proprietary technology. You don't have to pay quite a bit of money for these developers who are hard to get. So if your developers are comfortable with React, you could use React frameworks. If they're comfortable with Angular or Vue, it truly depends. The same exact way, every single part of the stack you choose for your infrastructure, for your websites, you could pick what your team is most comfortable with. Forms, again, truly comes down to your choice. I wouldn't prefer something which is just forms. I would probably go with something like a HubSpot or an Eloqua or things, Marketo, who have customer management. You could have embedded forms. You could do a lot more with the information you're getting back. You can retarget your customers. So pick what works for you best. Again, analytics. You could pick, again, anything you like. Most of the analytics you currently have in play will work really well. It's no different than any other website you've done in the past. So put the tracking on your page, whatever your analytic tool is, and it'll work with you really well. Personalization, this is, I think, one of the sticking point for some orgs, but personalization has come a long way, even in the last 5 years. Companies like Optimizely have grown from basically, I remember when I first implemented Optimizely, no one even knew its name. But now it's a huge piece of the pie. They do quite a bit of personalization. Google has gotten into it recently with Google Optimize. If you're working with a couple of different CMSs which are integrated with Uniform, it's a really good option. So there's a couple of differences in personalization. Things like Optimizely and Optimize, you can personalize. You could give it to someone who is able to use their web UI and make changes as to use A or B or different variations based on the experiment you're conducting. The only issue, though, is that you don't own the content. So the variation which is actually working for certain set of customers, that doesn't belong to you. It sits somewhere else. You don't have knowledge of that. But if you use something similar to Uniform, it's closer to the content. So you are actually able to see a Hero 1 is doing better than Hero 2. So you'd want to be able to use Hero 1, make multiple variations and run it through. So it's a little bit closer to the content. You know more about which part of the content is working well for you. Again, your choice. Speaking of that, I'm going to pause for this moment, bring in Andre, and for him to do his presentation on the biggest misconceptions about Jamstack.
Thank you very much. So first, let me give you a bit of an insight why or what got me to this kind of presentation. When I started working as developer evangelist, I started to talking to developers about various technologies that they use. And me coming from .NET meant that I had to learn quite a lot of stuff from JavaScript frameworks. And there was the time when Jamstack was just starting as an architecture. Yeah. And people were coming to me, and I was always explaining to them what Jamstack is. And there was a lot of I was hearing a lot of misconceptions that those people thought about Jamstack, but they were not actually true. And you would think that with the amount of content that is being published and that was published about Jamstack, that there will be no misconceptions anymore. But it's the other way around. Actually, I hear more and more of these. So what do people say about Jamstack? I try to, take all of the things that I hear and try to categorize them. And I ended up with about 5 categories. And each category, I'm going to devote a special slide to each of those and tell you why that isn't true. Yeah. So first of all, people say that static site is dumb, immature. Second category is I have to learn JavaScript in order to do Jamstack. Third one is Jamstack is too fragile. That means the whole architecture is too fragile to use. Next one is that the disjointed UI sucks. Mainly content editors are saying that. And the last one is that everything about Jamstack is bad. I really prefer this category because everything that I couldn't categorize into the other ones, I just put it here, and we'll see what people actually say about that. So these are all the against Jamstack arguments that I'll try to show you that they are not true. So first of all, static site is dumb, immature. So people say Let me first start with what is and isn't Jamstack. Yeah, that might be a better start. So Jamstack is short for JavaScript API and Markup. That's what the guys before me were already saying. But people, when they see JavaScript, mainly .NET developers or Java developers, those that are not really in daily contact with JavaScript, they become frightened a bit. But the thing is that static site does not mean Jamstack API or Markup. Static site is a combination of all of that. It's an architecture. Yeah. The only thing that the architecture gives you or tells you to do is that the site is pre-built and it encourages you to separate concerns. So we use API. API is used to get data into the site. So that's a build time of the site. We use Markup because obviously you need to tell or you need to define how the site is going to look like. So you need a markup. But JavaScript is just the front-end part. Yeah. Once your clients, your visitors start consuming the site, it's the time of the client-side functionality. That's why we have JavaScript here. But we could very easily switch that to WebAssembly. Yeah. If you know Blazor from .NET, that could also fit into the Jamstack architecture somehow. But let's start with what people are saying. So they say that it cannot be personalized or it cannot be dynamically changed, static sites. That static site is just a bunch of HTML files. Now, this is the most common misconception about Jamstack. It does not tell you that the static site has to be dumb. It does not tell you that with the set of static files, it has to end. The problem is that a lot of people still remember the 90s and the sites that we were doing with front page, DreamWorks and other editors like that, that were really just a bunch of static files. But nowadays it works completely differently, and with Jamstack, it's just the end result. But what I really like to use is this picture that I created for one of my articles that actually shows how a static site can be made dynamic, how it can be personalized. And you see that, not sure if you can see my cursor, but let's not rely on that. So the first time when you can actually make the static site personalized or dynamic is at a build time. Now, I know that people often say if they have e-commerce solutions, they need to display products, they need to display similar products. They want to display related articles for the one that you are reading right now. And they call that dynamic functionality. But in reality, that's something that you already know at a build time. You already know that if you're selling socks as your product, probably people are going to be interested in shoes or something very similar. So you already know what are the best fitting products for the one that you're looking at. So you already know that information at a build time. And you can save a lot of processing power if you actually incorporate it into that site in a static way. So that's the first part. You can do whatever you want during the build time. And then, of course, there is the user interaction. When the site is actually live, then you can use client-side JavaScript to do any kind of personalization, any kind of dynamic loading of data. And I'm going to show you that on the next slide, where I actually have an example of a wedding site that I was creating for myself. So I got married earlier this year between the two Corona crises. And this site actually shows that on the left side, when you see the timeline item, that's really personalized for the person that's looking at it. Now, we had about 100 guests, which meant about 50 invites, and each invite had a unique URL. So you see that the invite URL is what actually enables the static site generator to personalize the whole page. So every invitee had their own page. You see here that it also nicely greets whoever is looking at the page. It also enabled me to add their form or RSVP form that I can communicate through with the invitee. So you can definitely personalize a static site. What people are usually blending together is personalization and segmentation. Now, for segmentations, there are services like the guys before me already mentioned. But personalization is not a problem with a static site. And even if you don't want to pre-generate all the versions or all the variants of a static site, you can still have parts of each static or each part of a static site. You can have generated dynamically, or you can have the page do some dynamic client-side JavaScript requests to your API when the page is actually rendered on the visitor's browser. So that's one thing. This is the other thing. This is actually a site built with Next.js, one of my sample apps. All of them are actually available publicly on my GitHub, so feel free to take a look. Now, this page, what it actually does is, you see here in the URL that there is a part that says CZ/ and the license plate of a car. And what this page does, it's actually deployed on Netlify, so it's completely static. But when you see the page, when you define or when you change the license plate, it loads new messages. So the two guys there, those are messages that are coming from a NoSQL database. And those messages are gathered when you start looking at the page. Yeah, so the page does an asynchronous request to get the data into the static app. And as a result, I could publish this on a static host. So that's another point, that the page can definitely be dynamic. Next part is I have to learn JavaScript. Now, obviously, there are JavaScript-based static site generators like Gatsby, Next, Nuxt, and others. And there are other platforms. Other platforms have zero connection with JavaScript. I outlined static, Hugo, Jekyll, Eleventy here. Those are the most used ones. Static, as guys before me mentioned, is for .NET. But there is one thing that I wanted to mention that actually differentiates JavaScript-based static site generators from the other platforms, and that is the client-side functionality. If you build a site with Gatsby and Next, and I think Nuxt also has something now, then you can get nice features like nice transitions between pages that you can see here on this GIF. Sorry for the quality, but you can visit my personal site to see the full one. But these transitions between pages, this is something that the JavaScript-based static site generator gives you. It gives you a bundle that the client gets when they load the site that enables you to do things like preload images that you can see based on the action of the visitor. You can guess what page they are going to access next, and you can preload those data. So all these nice features you can get with the JavaScript-based static site generators. But it definitely it is definitely an advantage. But if you don't want to learn JavaScript, you can use other platforms as well. Next thing is JavaScript is too fragile. Now, people say that it's too complicated to use, that the deployments are complicated, and APIs are too hard to configure to work together. Now, let's compare that to traditional systems, right? Usually people say that the weakest link of the chain defines the strength of the whole ecosystem. That means the weakest API of the whole process will define how strong your deployment and ecosystem actually is. But the fact that JavaScript allows you to choose services means that you can always find the right service for you. You don't have to choose between 10 CMSs and always make a compromise in terms of features. But you can really choose the best of breed solution and put it into your Jamstack site. Now, obviously, we know that for authentication, you're probably going to be using Auth0 to connect all the providers. For a headless CMS, you could use Content, you could use Contentful, or any other CMS that fits your requirements the best, right? With traditional, and the next thing is the separation of test and live data. With traditional systems, this was typically bound to a database. With database, whenever you wanted to publish something on a staging environment or on a live environment, you usually had to duplicate the database. You had to configure all the services that were communicating with each environment, and it was kind of complicated. With Jamstack, this is easier because every service gives you a specific access data, and that's all you need to do. Typically, those services are cloud hosted, so you don't care about any of that. And that brings me to deployments. Now, with environments and environmental variables, you obviously get to deployments. And the good thing about Jamstack is, as opposed to traditional systems, is that if your build fails, and that can happen, you can make a mistake, or the service may be down, or something can happen. the failed build is not triggering deployment, so the failed build will not break your whole site that is live. I remember when we were doing deployments of large projects, many years ago. Those were .NET projects. We were deploying them to Azure. Now, in the deployment process, if something went wrong, there were occasions when the whole site could have gone down, the whole production site. So Jamstack in this sense is also safer. So it's true that it can get fragile, no discussion about that, but it also means that it's safer because whatever happens on the build side is probably not going to trigger the final deployments. And the last thing I have here is that the developers have fun building Jamstack sites. Now, if you look at developers who are working with legacy systems, old traditional systems on monoliths, sometimes, and that's definitely not all of them, but sometimes I hear them that they are saying that they are not enjoying the work because they are forced to work in a specific platform. They are forced to work on certain features with certain products. With Jamstack, it's not the case. With Jamstack, they can choose the platform they want, or you can choose a platform that makes sense for your company, and still have the developers enjoy what they are doing. Next thing is disjointed UI sucks. Now, mainly content editors saying that they have no visual editing experience, that content editors have to wait a long time to see their changes, and the whole website, the whole Jamstack site needs to rebuild to see a simple change, or that they're having a hard time to find a specific backing content item of a specific page that they need to adjust. Now, this is the case that I'm talking about when you are trying to find one item in a bucket of items, and you need to find a specific enough text in that item to actually find the one that you're looking for. Now, finding content items can be a bit tricky in headless CMS, but that doesn't mean that there aren't ways how to solve this. Now, this is an example of my personal site where I implemented a SmartLink SDK. That's something that connects a Jamstack site to a headless CMS and allows you to, just by looking at an item, you can click on it, and that takes you right into the editing interface of that specific item. So the content editors don't have to look for the item they need to change, but they get there directly. Next thing is, and if we go one level further, we can get to a web spotlight that's actually bringing the Jamstack site right into the UI of the headless CMS. So the editors see what they are used to. They see the navigation tree on the left side, they see the site on the right side, and by clicking on the edit icons, they see actually modal dialog appear where they can directly change the content. So we bring the visual and the live site editing directly to the content editors, and they can have the same experience on Jamstack site as they are used to from traditional systems. So what you've seen is directly tied to JavaScript based static site generators, because obviously there are features like incremental builds, there are features like fast previews, using preview webhooks and dynamically rendered pages. So it's not just about the headless CMS, but it's also about the underlying technology. And these are Gatsby and Next both actually support this. So if you wanted to use that, these two work well. And it again goes back to JavaScript-based frameworks that are somewhat stronger because they are having the feature battle, which will be most preferred. And the last one is everything about Jamstack is bad. Two things I have here saying that SEO is a problem. Here we go with JavaScript again and single-page apps. People are always saying that. And second thing that I'm hearing is that bad performance caused by huge JS bundles. Now, both of these things are actually true. SEO can be both good and bad. Jamstack is not, forcing you to have a bad SEO. It's just that the traditional systems, they give you some features that are already better than nothing. Yeah. So with Jamstack, you can go both directions depending on whether you know what you are doing or not. Now, in here, I have a link to a great article by Andy Thompson from Luminary. I will provide the slides so you can then take a look. And the next thing is huge JS bundles, which were always a problem, not only with Jamstack. With Jamstack, it again is about a misuse of the technology that you are working with. But think about traditional systems and jQuery bundles, bootstraps, that those were kind of megabytes of data that were downloaded for even looking at a simple piece of content. So I'm not saying that this isn't a problem, but it used to be a problem all the time, and it's basically about how you use a specific technology. Now, the last slide here, Jamstack is not the ultimate best solution. It definitely brings many benefits like performance, much easier and cheaper scalability, much easier and cheaper hosting. It encourages you to separate concerns. It doesn't mean that if you invest in building your site on a specific solution that you will be locked with the vendor for a long time. But it also brings happier developers. But there is no ultimate solution for every project. Every project needs you to evaluate the requirements and make a best decision based on those. So thank you for your attention. Thank you to Conabos guys for inviting me. And if you want to get in touch with me, feel free to use any channel here.
Awesome. Thank you, Andre. All right, so I'm going to bring in Mark, who's going to talk about how to enable a more sustainable development process. Go on, Mark.
Great. Thank you for that. So I was asked to really kind of summarize what we're seeing in the headless space and really talk about a couple factors into real depth. So at the end of this presentation, I have a white paper that I did for Contentful which really talks about a lot of the scalability issues and what we do in Jamstack relative to what legacy CMSs do. But I'm going to focus on what I consider, I think, the two most important. And the first is development agility, and the second is risk mitigation. And one of the things that Andre talked about from a developer perspective is developers liking to work with Jamstack tools a lot more than they like to work with legacy tools. And as I go through these reasons, I think it probably becomes more obvious why that is the case. And the first is you've got front-end choice. And so, that means one of two things. That either means front-end choice for frameworks, so things like Gatsby or Next.js, you really have a lot of choice in static site generation, but that also means front-end choice in terms of language itself. And I think that's one of the things that really differentiates headless CMSs from those legacy CMSs is really that ability to choose, what that front end is. And that actually has a lot of implications in terms of risk mitigation, but certainly it has implications for development agility, because that means that you can start to implement headless CMSs alongside of other applications, and your team doesn't need to reskill. They're really just working with that headless CMS, often with an SDK that is built specifically for that front end language that you already use. Another real benefit for a lot of SaaS-based headless CMSs is really you get the best of both SaaS and open source worlds. If you're looking at the Jamstack community sort of holistically, it looks and feels a lot like the LAMP community in that there's a lot of code out there. A lot of people are sharing best practices. There's a lot of tooling to support these things, and so that really helps with getting up and running very quickly, and that includes not just the headless CMSs, but a lot of those tools like Netlify and Gatsby and Next.js. There's a lot of code out there. There's a lot of example templates. There's a lot of videos that the community is producing for learning and best practices. So that's really key as well. But you also get the advantages of having a SaaS approach. So if you think back to a lot of that old LAMP stack community, you had to think about things like hosting, whereas nowadays a lot of those problems are really minimized and made easy by the fact that there's multi-tenant SaaS. And to Andre's point, there's a lot of these things that you can get started and up and running even for free. So that's something that Contentful, we strongly believe. We have a community edition that's for free for any developer that's learning, or any nonprofit or philanthropic organization. You can have a Contentful instance and get up and running. Netlify is very similar as well with that. So you're really getting the best of that SaaS agility culture and that open source community and sharing culture as well, and that's very common. To get into some of the details around continuous integration and CI/CD capabilities, it's this concept of content as code. And these things tend to have a lot more implications towards more of the enterprise things. I think a lot of those things that I've been talking to up until now apply to smaller organizations getting started. But this is something that you start to get into as you really start to scale up the size of your organization. And I think this is really where those legacy CMSs start to run into instances of scalability processes. And I can think of those areas where you have 300 different regions, and you've got all these different agencies working with that application, and it becomes very, very difficult to manage that process. And in a lot of those legacy CMS cases, you are compiling down to an executable. And so if you've got all of these teams working with that executable, you then need to layer on development standards and coding standards against the CMS. And a lot of these other vendors have introduced that, but it means that in order to start working with that content and start as a developer, you need to spend a lot of time understanding the application and the framework and your organization's development standards on top of that. That is a lot less true with Jamstack vendors for a few things. One, it's this concept of content as code, and it really allows you to use your headless CMS in concert with these other processes, and it becomes very easy to move content around in an agile fashion, and using tools like command line tools or migration type tooling. And so you can really do things like, if you are driving your content to a mobile application, you can then basically have your content authors working in the CMS, and then essentially pulling content out and doing versioned deployments, which in turn go into things like mobile applications, or things like IoT devices for car navigation. And so this is very important for people who are using their headless CMS, essentially driving content into product channels or voice channels or other IoT channels that aren't that traditional web model of just pushing out that latest content change for that one item. That becomes very important. Another thing that headless CMSs tend to do better is this working with environments. So if you think again back to legacy CMSs, if you want to test an app that you're building with that CMS, you need to spin up an entire other instance of that CMS, test that app. If you need to change things, there's no way to roll that back out. In headless CMSs, it's typically the opposite. It's very easy to spin up sandboxes. You can test content model changes, you can test app changes, and you can burn those down when you're done with them. Similarly, in the case of Contentful, we have environment aliases, which again allow you to within the user interface essentially say, right, this is the main version, or this is going to be the test version or the UAT version. So that's really I think one of the keys to that developer agility is making it very easy to establish those environments, get a developer onboarded, and test changes, and burn down environments very, very quickly. Last is, of course, because you've separated content from presentation, and because also we have more capabilities around CI/CD, it makes it very easy to work in parallel with other teams and content authors. So those are some of the things that, from a repository perspective, we're applying newer models that within the Jamstack community that sort of enable this, whereas a lot of those legacy vendors, they came about when they were solving different problems, and we're solving different problems now with these approaches. The last big one is, often it's very easy for developers to get queues throughout the application. So as you're building out a content model, you can get a JSON preview of what that looks like. Or as you're building webhooks that have triggers for moving content around, you can see what that webhook log looks like, and actually sort of troubleshoot the request and the headers and all of those things that you're doing from a security perspective as you're communicating with other systems. And so these things, because these are SaaS applications which you're delivering across the internet, you don't have as much a view and a front end, which is an authoring experience, and a back end view, which is a developer experience that has all the logging. All of that developer experience is exposed to the front end because that is how that software is delivered. And so again, it makes it far easier for developers to get used to a system and really truly understand that system. So the next big thing is risk mitigation. And I think the biggest one here is, with a lot of SaaS vendors, is upgrades, right? And if you think back to a lot of legacy CMS systems, upgrades are a big concern and a big problem because you are essentially having to spin up another environment, test those changes, make sure the actual upgrade itself went well, and make sure all of your custom implementation functionality on top of that upgrade also passes that. And so, if you think back to, if I look at it from my perspective as a Jamstack vendor, the point in time that a lot of customers start looking at a system like Contentful or Kentico, it's often at this upgrade point because they'll be talking to an agency and they'll be asking, okay, what is that ultimate cost, and what's the functionality that I'm getting for that upgrade of that legacy system? And so if you're running on a SaaS system, basically, the CMS can be adding functionality, and we do that all the time. And so does Kentico, and so does every other vendor. They're just pushing out new features and functions, and it has zero implication on your code and your front-end experience that you're delivering. Another big thing, at least for us, is again the easy management of custom functionality. And so because we are delivering a Jamstack application, the same principles that you have for creation of your code on your front end, those same principles apply for creation of code for us for those typical backend functions. So this includes things like adding buttons or custom rich text editors or sidebar panels. And in the case of Contentful, we have an app framework that allows you to sort of manage that and delegate how different spaces can use different functions. And so it makes it very easy to manage that custom functionality. And again, having a front-end developer be able to do those back-end functions for users really makes a lot of sense. The biggest one as far as upgrades is delinking of these concerns. And so I'd mentioned it a bit in the context of upgrades, but this has a lot of implications for not just the core CMS and the front-end language, but also the front-end implementation. And I think it's a really common thing to have happen that legacy CMSs are trying to keep up with the changes in front-end technology. And so they're often introducing newer frameworks or retiring older methods of front-end coding. I know that even for me, I came from a legacy vendor. I lived through 5 different versions of sort of the flavor of the week for front-end. And part of it is if you wanted to start working with a different front-end approach, like MVC came along, for example, you then also needed to upgrade your backend. Similarly speaking, if you want to upgrade because the CMS itself has some functionality that you have, often you're being dragged along by saying, right, you now also need to switch your front end approach to MVC. And so delinking these concerns really helps mitigate that risk, because you are no longer, one, having to upgrade the core CMS. You have no dependencies upon what that front-end language is or that front-end implementation. You really get to choose when that happens. And then the biggest one that we see is adding new channels with ease. And so, this is really the case where, especially sort of in the COVID era, many people are adding mobile applications. Many people are adding things like voice channels and chatbots for support. And so the ability to have content structured in a way and basically spin up new API endpoints and where your content may be transformed slightly for those endpoints becomes a lot easier for those Jamstack type vendors, because you've got more control over your content repository. Your content is already in a very front-end agnostic way. And the SaaS model and the performance behind the SaaS model really allow you to add those channels with ease. And so those are kind of the two big things that we're seeing. Obviously, we see a lot of other factors like infrastructure. So, if your underlying infrastructure is backed by CDNs, or whether you have to manage that yourself, that's often a big question that you have to take into account. Software architecture, I talked a lot about that and what that means for development agility. Content modeling is another big one. A lot of legacy CMSs, it's very difficult to content model, or that content model is applied for that entire CMS installation footprint. Whereas in the case of Contentful and a lot of other headless CMSs, content modeling is very easy to do. It's a visual task. You can script it with those APIs, and you can have slightly different content models for different spaces. And so it gives you, and you can test content models within environments. And so in the old world, you sort of had to do a lot of thinking about your content model up front. And if you got it wrong, it was a lot of work to change and back that out. In the case of Contentful and other systems, content modeling is very easy. And it's very easy to make those changes because we've got the tools to be able to do that. Usability, again, for front end is another big factor. A lot of us, SaaS CMS vendors, we're backing that content delivery with a CDN. That's also true for content authoring. So in a lot of large organizations where you have content authors worldwide, and they want to have a really nice, tight experience where the front end itself is delivered by a modern framework, really we're seeing a lot of customers come to folks like us specifically just because the content authoring experience itself is very, very quick and fast. So it's sort of replicating that developer agility experience. And then, of course, the configuration and customization question. And this, again, goes to the same principles that you apply for building those front ends also apply typically to building backend and authoring functionality and extending that experience for your CMS authors themselves. So that's kind of the summary. And I'm pretty much right at time. And of course, you can read the white paper and follow me on Twitter as well if you have any additional questions. But I think there's now a Q&A portion.
Yes, there is. Thanks, Mark. So we have quite a few comments liking the session, which is awesome. We also have some questions. And this is to pretty much anyone who wants to answer it. So let me just add Andre back in. So the question is, what about personalization that depends on user behavior? So when we're talking about Jamstack, I think this is very common when enterprises are looking into it, right? How would you guys answer this?
I'll say there's a few different ways to answer it. And to Cam's point early, there's no one-size-fits-all model. So I think if you're looking at it from a high-level product perspective, something like Segment or CDP makes a lot of sense. And so you're often able to drive that from known first-party information that you have from other channels. So that's marketing automation channels, that's interaction on the web channel. So CDP is kind of like the big hammer. Next level down are vendors like Optimizely, vendors like Uniform, which are really sort of thinking about the website construct and how people interact with the behavior on the site, and that's kind of their primary source of that information. And then there's sort of one lower down, which was sort of the example that Andre gave, which you can do simple personalization, just with tools that you make very quickly. But that's sort of the three different bears approach. I don't know, Andre, what you have to add there.
Yeah, in terms of development, I would say that we're getting from static site back to SPAs, because at that point, it's just a site that's running on client with a client bundle. Because without client JavaScript, you cannot achieve pretty much anything. What you can do is you can give people in a newsletter a unique URLs that will lead to a static site, but otherwise, the only option you have is to leverage the client side bundle.
Right. I will add that, tools like the Optimizely and Google Optimize, the Uniform suite, they do allow for the personalization even of these static sites as well. So, and the feeding back of that to the customer, to the CDP behind the scenes. So don't think because you have a static site that you're not still doing those things. And we often find that folks buy suites for that and then end up not using it anyway. So I mean, why not just layer that on when you have the need and when you're ready for it? And you can, you're not going to be boxed in because you have this lightning fast static site. You're going to be able to use tools like Uniform and Optimizely and Google Optimize to get that personalization that you're seeking.
Yeah, I'm just going to add something really quick on the CDP subject. I think, and Dennis, your point about most organizations, if you really have a need for personalization that goes beyond kind of the marketing sort of fluffy sheen of personalization, like if you're truly personalizing sort of in a product management type sense, you probably already have a CDP, and you probably already have a CDP because it's far more optimized for the task. There's a lot of different flavors of CDPs out there, and there's a lot of CDP vendors out there, and because of that, they can get very granular with the types of use cases that they're targeting. And so again, because of that, organizations tend to buy a very specific and very specialized CDP, and that makes a lot more sense to be integrating that into your larger Jamstack than it does to be then buying a suite that also has its own view of the world on personalization and trying to reconcile the two, because you're going to be overpaying, you're going to be buying two things, and they probably won't play well.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing that I really appreciate about the Jamstack approach. I mean, there's so much blurring of the lines between those responsibilities. And so you'll buy a tool that does a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And before you know it, you're just doubled up on all of the capabilities. At least with this Jamstack approach, you can buy a little bit of a module here and really tie that in. So be a little bit more granular in what you do. And I guess that ties in well with the microservice-based sort of approaches to architecture these days as well.
Yeah, well, and it also comes down to buying patterns, right? Like it means that you can easily scale that up. If you try that experiment with, another system and it works, and you want to do more of it, you don't have to overbuy based upon a 3-year contract that has all of your buying needs set out 3 years in advance. You can really scale these things up and down as you need them.
Right on.
Awesome. So we have a couple more questions. So Jamstack sounds like we have our cake and eat it too. What is the overall adoption of this framework? That's a good question. So I can go if you guys are not speaking. So I feel like more and more companies are looking at this as an option, because if you're able to give freedom in terms of the cost for hosting, cost for building, cost for not having to struggle to find resources to build these sites. And traditionally, you have to remember, bigger enterprises do have in-house teams as well as external teams coming in to help out. This lends itself really well to using the abilities you have to build these sites. And that, I think, is very, very crucial. And what we are seeing is that companies are willing to make the step to build the sites and use that additional income or additional money they have saved to work on these modular DXPs, building their stack in a way that they're giving the power to the marketers and investing in other tools, which play really nice with this. Is the way we are seeing it with our existing customers.
Absolutely. And in terms of just the adoption of the dev tools, I mean, you're talking about JavaScript. Ubiquitous. We're talking about these API first approaches, or things like GraphQL. These are things where your developers are going to have some exposure. So that's really then makes it a lot easier to adopt, rather than, for example, dealing with a large monolith like an SAP or something like that, where you're going to have very specialized resources for those things. So adoption-wise, the pieces have been, as Cam said, they go back to the beginnings of the web. So yeah, these things have been around for a long time. We're not talking about something just new. It's really just rethinking how we architect and use these bits in a little bit of a leaner approach. So thanks for that question, Amit.
Yeah, I would actually. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so I would actually add to that that we definitely see as a company, we see the trend of getting asked more and more about scaling. So it's clear that enterprises are more and more interested in Jamstack, and they are really interested how those sites scale, how they can bring the best experience to content editors on sites that have 10,000, 100,000 content items that are publishing items throughout the whole day, and that cannot afford to wait 5 minutes for an item to be published and live on the site. So the trend in the previous years was to show what's possible with Jamstack. Now it's not so much about what's possible, but how we can take it to the next level in terms of performance, in terms of experience of the users that are using Jamstack. And you can clearly see the direction on what Gatsby and Next.js are doing, because they are moving exactly in this direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would take that premise of Jamstack sounds like we can have our performance cake and eat it too. Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. It basically means that you've got that full control over that presentation layer. But what I would also say is, on the performance side, there's sort of three elements to that. The one is around just authoring experience and sort of building that site, and then two is around that content delivery. And what I would say is, there's content delivery and performance for the APIs that we deliver, but then there's other approaches. And to Andre's point, Gatsby and Next get faster and better and are starting to do things like incremental site builds, and static site generation on the client side is obviously the fastest way to be delivering content. But obviously static site generation doesn't has some trade-offs as far as things like previewing content, and so there's improvements on performance on that end a lot. But what Dennis is asking about my Lego Star Wars. But what I would say is, even though we as a vendor are delivering content headlessly, and we are benchmarked on what our API performance is, often a lot of our customers come back to us saying, hey, we got X amount of performance improvement. Our Lighthouse scores improved X or Y. Our fastest contentful paint goes down to whatever, a few seconds. And it's really because the type of it's not a causation relationship, but there's certainly a correlation, because those types of people that care about those benchmarks and care about building that front end experience that delivers good SEO and good at Lighthouse scores and all these other things tend to also like the things that we are building and putting forth for them as a platform. And so those two things tend to go hand in hand, even if we're not actually responsible for the front end delivery in a lot of those cases.
Makes sense. All right, this is another question. What do you see the biggest weakness for Jamstack? What should people be aware of?
I guess I'll tackle that first. I think the biggest weakness compared to legacy DXPs is features, right? And if you sort of boil down the value proposition of legacy DXPs, it's kind of like you're buying all these features, but you need to think about the performance and the environment and developer instances and all that other stuff. That's kind of up to you to manage. Whereas Jamstack sort of flips it on its head. You're buying that architecture, but a lot of those things like features, like personalization and other aspects of the authoring experience, you sort of need to figure those things out. And so it's not necessarily a weakness of Jamstack, because you can still get everything that you need. To that previous commenter's point, you can have your cake and eat it too. But if you're coming from a marketer view of the legacy world and you want WYSIWYG pages and drag and drop assembly of those pages, the experience and the value proposition that Jamstack gets you, and the skills that your developers need, and the understanding of the MarTech landscape, it has to be very different. And so to Andre's presentation, that's kind of some of the misconceptions that we confront on a regular basis.
And I would maybe add to that, looking at it from a completely different perspective, from development's point of view. With Jamstack sites, you're gonna have to invest quite a lot of effort into the implementation of the site. And from my point of view, the essential thing is if you that you need to choose the tool that you will be using for the site very carefully, because it seems, we said that Jamstack is about separation of concerns, right? But if you decide to go with a specific tool for static site generation, you're tied with the plugins that you're using for that, and in the end, you will find out that all the implementation effort that you put into that site, if you want to switch the tool that you've built the site on top of, oftentimes it means that you have to repeat a lot of that effort again. So it's not as if you could just switch the underlying technology, with one click. So I would say really invest your time into doing research. Which tool is the best for you? What is what are the technologies that your developers are working with? Or if you're a company that's expanding a lot, how easy it is for you to get developers for specific platforms. Yeah, those are really some aspects of choosing the right technology that ensure the long-term success.
I would agree with that. You definitely need to sort of do that thinking up front. But what I would say is you at least only have to think about swapping out a component, versus if you bought the wrong legacy CMS, you've got to swap out everything. So you're at least compartmentalizing that research and understanding problem to a specific part of the overall stack.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll add, and from an implementer perspective, a bit of a commercial there, and that it's really important to pick the right partners to guide you as you choose those components. Not every one of those things on Build Your DXP is the right choice for you. So have somebody who's going to be able to really guide you on picking the right components, the right modules for your use case. So picking the right partner is an important part of that. Obviously, picking the right headless CMS, picking the right optimization tools, all of those things. So depend on an experienced partner for that. They'll be able to make your life in the future a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll echo that as well, and not just because I'm here at the invitation of a partner, but that's one of the things, and it's not just true in Jamstack, but in the marketing technology space right now. There's so many choices out there, and I mentioned CDPs. There's 100 CDP vendors, so having somebody that understands what those look like, what the trade-offs are, what the technologies are involved, what their APIs look like, and being able to ask those questions and guide you in that choice really is kind of critical. In the old world, it was sort of like, well, we just need to know .NET and we're going to buy one thing and go deep on that technology and sort of make it work. Whereas I think the new world is know what those pieces are out there in order to assemble those experiences. And that's definitely a different skill set for sure.
That's right. That's why Mark's such a big fan of the Lego, which I'm coveting.
It is, yeah. It's
right. You have to pick the right set. You got to put the pieces together in the right way if you want to have the Millennial Falcon.
Yeah, we all have that modular metaphor, right? And I think that modular metaphor definitely fits with Jamstack. Like you can start with these bricks and build something that's really fantastic and functional. Somebody else may have the same bricks and build something that doesn't work at all. And that's where the skill is picking the bricks and knowing how to assemble them, versus how it was before.
That's why you need craftsmen.
Yes.
All right. So
this is very interesting. Just one point to this is that from the past I was used to clients actually asking agencies to build websites for them, and the agencies buying the legacy systems and then building whatever they wanted, to make the client happy. But with Jamstack and with headless, maybe it's not just about Jamstack. Maybe it's that the whole industry is evolving. But what I see definitely way more today or these days is that clients, they don't want agencies to build websites for them, but they want to build their websites with them together. And the same way we see agencies working with us, not asking us to sell our system to them, but actually work with them to see how to make the client happy and make sure that that their requirements will be fulfilled and that everyone is happy. So the whole, customer success management and overall success management is much stronger these days.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. So we have two more questions, and this screams Mark to me, but I'll say it out there anyway. So what do you see in the future of both Jamstack and traditional CMS systems?
Oh yes, the soothsayer, man. He was right in 2020. So what's coming up, Mark?
Well, so let's see. I think we're going to see a lot more trying to incorporate more of those marketing and content operations type functions into CMSs. This may not be so much of a prediction. Some of these things have already started to pass. Adobe has acquired Workfront, Gather Content, just announced something of a headless delivery API option. I know Kentico's been building more functions for marketers. We have as well, things like, tasks and workflows. So I think that on the Jamstack side, we have in the past as an industry prioritized developers. And sort of the answer for marketers was, hey, marketers, your developers are going to be happier and more responsive to you, therefore you'll be happier. And I think a lot more of that is going to be developing things specifically targeted towards marketers. And that includes, making the system easier to understand, adding things like WYSIWYG, adding things like tasks, workflow, and more scheduling functions and all that sort of stuff. So that's going to happen on the Jamstack side, and on the flip side, the exact opposite is going to happen on the traditional CMS side. They're going to be trying to add more of that hybrid headless type capability in order to try to compete on those development agility things that I was talking about in my slide. So it's a real yin and yang, right, about where those strengths are and what they're trying to build out to address different markets. So that's my 2 cents. Andre probably has some thoughts on his own as well.
Now, I would actually agree on a lot of your points. At least on the Jamstack side, I think that there's going to be a place for both, for Jamstack and also traditional systems, because there are customers that will always want to own every single piece of content that they create. There will be customers that the traditional systems are just a better fit for them. And I actually see a lot of these customers in the mid-market or in the small market, where you can just get a lot of features just like that. You can host it, and it's overall much cheaper than investing in new solutions if you just want the website to be running. Markets for both. In terms of the headless CMSs, what Mark said is definitely true. We're going to be looking at everyone trying to make those systems closer to marketers, to content editors, to ensure that everyone loves Jamstack. Yeah, it's not just about developers, but everyone needs to like the overall experience. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. One last question, and I think we can call it. So what are the types of scenarios that you can accomplish with Jamstack architecture that you couldn't with a traditional CMS?
I guess I'll take this. In theory, you can do everything with a traditional CMS. In practice, what I have seen is those non-web channels are far easier to do with Jamstack. There's just more tooling out there. You've got a lot more control over the API and the output with things like GraphQL. So in my experience here at Contentful, I've seen far more multi-channel experiences on Contentful than I have with legacy vendors. And again, it's not to say that you can't do it with a legacy vendor. It's just in practice, it's far easier, and you're not really fighting against the CMS, and you're not fighting against a page bias when you're building content.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I would say that, or I've seen use cases when a traditional CMS hit its limits in terms of scalability, because you cannot scale out or scale up indefinitely. And I've had experience with large enterprise clients when they actually were paying thousands of dollars a month for databases, and they really needed to geolocate more. And at some point, it was not even possible. Yeah. So definitely in these cases, Jamstack sites would help, because in those cases you can distribute it via CDNs and ensure much better experience for the site's visitors. And definitely what Mark said about multi-channel, this is it's possible with traditional, but you will never get the same experience as with headless. Now we're talking about Jamstack, and Jamstack is pretty much web. But we see also a lot of customers that are doing web as a primary channel, but they are also servicing content for mobile apps, for kiosks, for any other hardware. And then you can really leverage the possibility of having the content delivered by a single API. And that kind of goes against WYSIWYG, yeah, because WYSIWYG is pretty much a web thing. But if you kind of take your content editors out of that a bit and give them a better capabilities for ensuring the good visuals on all the platforms, then doing multi-channel with headless is way easier than with traditional systems.
Mm-hmm.
Right on. And I'll go back myself again to craftsmanship. I think that, much akin to you buy a home, you can modify it, you can do your modifications, or you can build something custom right from the get-go. And it comes down to the skill of your craftsman as well. So what can you do? Anything you can dream up, just as long as you architect and build it right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I know we went a little bit over, but it was really good going through these questions. Thanks, Mark and Andre. And thanks, everyone, for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.